On today's Gangster Profile, Boston Mafia's feared enforcer, Ilario Zannino, aka Larry Baione. Ilario Zannino, aka Larry Baione, was the Boston Mafia's main enforcer. Even in his older days, Baione was still one of the most feared men in Boston, especially from the Italian faction. Baione for years was the real muscle in the Boston Mafia. He only took orders from Jerry Angiulo because Raymond told him to. Larry certainly did not fear or respect Jerry Angiulo, but he did Raymond Patriarca. Ilario Zannino was born on June 15, 1920 in the city of Boston. He was raised on the South End Roxbury line to Italian immigrant parents. His mother's maiden name was Baione, so he used that as an alias in the underworld. When Baione lived in the South End, it was mostly Italian, Jewish, Greek, and Eastern European. Zannino worked as an apprentice in his father's South End shoemaking shop. Then as a teenager, the family moved to the rural town of Franklin, Mass. Even though he graduated from Franklin High School, he still spent most of his time in the South End of Boston. His mother ran a large chicken and pig farm on their land in Franklin. Larry would go back to the South End and collect garbage to bring back to feed the pigs. Yes, people did and probably still do feed pigs garbage. But it's okay, man, because bacon tastes great. Baione would inherit the farm later in life, and I wonder how many people those pigs have eaten.
The best thing to do is feed them to pigs. You've got to starve the pigs for a few days, then the sight of a chopped up body will look like curry to a piss head. You've got to shave the heads of your victims and pull the teeth out for the sake of the pig's digestion. You could do this afterwards, of course, but you don't want to go sieving through pig shit now, do you? They will go through bone like butter. You need at least 16 pigs to finish the job in one sitting, so be wary of any man who keeps a pig farm.
Through his late teens and early 20s, Baione tried working a few honest jobs as a waiter, managing a nightclub, and as a pro boxer, but he mostly drifted towards crime. At 5'7", 160 pounds, he wasn't a very physically imposing figure, but believe me, he was a force of nature. He started running with a South End gang called Let's Go in the 40s. Early on, he developed a reputation for violence and he was feared. According to Howie Carr, he would stand on the runners on the side of the car, holding onto the roof with one hand and with the other hand holding onto a carbine. Now, I'd like to see a picture of this, but it does make for a good story. Zannino became more deeply involved in the underworld, making organized crime connections. He would run bar booth dice games and run Vegas nights, which are basically pop-up casinos. And of course, when gamblers lose their shirts at the tables, they're going to want loans, even at insanely high interest rates. This is loan sharking. If you borrow $100, $100 is the principal. If it's at 2 points, that's 20%, which is $20. That's the VIG. If you can't pay the principal, you pay the $20 VIG a week, and it usually ends up being more than the initial $100 loan. And believe me, people are going to pay Larry Baione back. Now, I'm not exactly sure when Baione officially became a made member in the Patriarca family. It was most likely in the late 40s or early 50s. Raymond Patriarca ruled over New England from Providence, Rhode Island. Boston was kind of a wide-open city back then, and there was a lot of money to be made. When he returned to Boston from the Navy in World War II, Jerry Angiulo dove headfirst into the rackets. He did illegal horse betting, numbers, and sports betting from his parents' store on Prince Street in the North End. Along with his brothers, Jerry was also running card games and bar booth dice games. Jerry had an incredible mind for numbers and had innovative ideas. His only problem was that he lacked muscle. Out of the 5 Angiulo brothers, Donato Donnie Angiulo was the only one that was considered tough. Seeing the money that Angiulo was making caught Baione's attention, and he started pressing Jerry, demanding money. What could Jerry do? He was no match for Baione, so as always, he came up with a plan. In a shrewd move, he showed up at Raymond's office on Atwells Avenue in Providence, Rhode Island, with a briefcase containing $50,000, which is like the equivalent to $250,000 in today's money. He promised Raymond $100,000 a year on the year, and Raymond, always being pragmatic, saw Angiulo's potential as an earner and accepted his offer. He inducted him into the family without even having to shed blood, and he also made him the underboss of Boston, bumping Henry Tamiello to the consigliere. This raised some eyebrows, but Raymond's word was law. Raymond called Baione to the office and explained the new terms to Baione. He wasn't happy, but he accepted it. Jerry Angiulo was a loudmouth little punk, and now Baione had to take orders from him. That's a tough pill to swallow. But it soon turned into the perfect combination. In Angiulo's brain and Baione's brawn, they ruled Boston. They organized all the bookies and loan sharks and said, "Kick it up, or else it's this." They turned Boston into a machine, racking up millions of dollars a year. Jerry bought a mansion in the Hunt, and Baione a beautiful brick house in the wealthy suburb of Swampscott. With Jerry mentoring young bookies and earners, Larry was cultivating a team of young killers. They were unstoppable. Larry was an extremely heavy drinker and spent most nights with his crew getting shit-faced at some bar or social club. Like many people, Baione would become a mean and violent drunk. On March 15, 1951, Zannino was cocked and at a bar, and ended up getting into a fistfight with a man named James Bratos. Even though Larry was a tough guy and had a reputation as a street fighter, he bit off more than he can chew against the bigger Bratos. Bratos gave him a pretty good beating and then promptly left. A few hours later, around 1 a.m., Larry Baione and two other companions, one of them being Richard Red Assad, a tough enforcer for the Mafia, but he couldn't become a made man because of his Syrian heritage. They called for Bratos, and when he opened up the door to see who it was, they started blasting at him. He ran back into the house, retrieved a .22 caliber rifle, and shot Baione and Assad in the leg. Unscathed, Bratos, 3 months later, would be sentenced to 3 years in prison for a previous case. Baione wouldn't forget, and a little over a month after Bratos was released, he left home to go on a job interview, and he was never seen again. Maybe the pigs in Franklin know where he is. James' younger brother Tosh was told by many different people that Baione was responsible for the disappearance of his brother. The pain of losing his brother and the hatred towards Baione was a dangerous combination. Tosh Bratos was a member of Joe Barbossa's East Boston gang. They were a group of misfits, but they were loyal to each other. Bratos never liked the Mafia, and he didn't trust the North End. Bratos would get drunk and talk loudly about killing Baione. A foolish idea. Baione is not the type of person that is going to let that go unchecked. Meanwhile, their leader Joe Barbossa was in jail and had $100,000 bail. He needed to get out before his parole was violated, or else he'd go away for years. His loyal underlings had managed to raise $70,000, which is pretty impressive for those days. I can't imagine who thought this was a good idea, but they reached out to the North End and asked if they could meet the difference to make the $100,000 bail. The Mafia said, "Of course, just come right over to the nightlight on the North End, but make sure you bring the money that you already have." Now, how in God's name was that not a red flag to these guys? A few minutes after they entered the nightlight, they were promptly shot in the head and then stacked on top of each other in a trunk and dumped in the South Boston projects. On a tip most likely from their friend Chico Amico, who was waiting in a car for them and they never returned, told the Boston PD. The BPD showed up at the nightlight to find Ralphie Chong Lamantina laying down a new carpet. When the police looked underneath the carpet, they found a huge bloodstain. Larry was furious with his men. "You don't hit them inside the joint, you take them outside and crack them right there on the sidewalk." Even though the Mafia's official position was neutral during the Irish Gang War of the 60s, Larry Baione was very close friends with Stevie Hugh of Charlestown from their time together in prison. I suspect he did more than just root for them. He probably aided him in the war effort somehow. In another incident, Baione got into a beef with Steve the Rifleman Flemmy about an unpaid gambling debt. Flemmy showed up at a bar and wanted money, but he only got a beating instead. Flemmy never forgot this slight and would eventually get his revenge decades later when he gave the FBI the information they needed to bug Angiulo's office and ended up landing Angiulo and Baione in prison. Because of the murders of his crew members, Joe Barbossa decided to flip and testify against the Mafia. They had tried everything to stop Barbossa. They even tried to kill his lawyer, John Fitzgerald. He was viewed as crossing the line between citizen and gangster. Someone put a bomb under his car and it exploded with him in it. He lived, but he lost a leg. Baione was caught on a wire apologizing for the fact that the lawyer was alive, and said the only reason he lived was because he turns the car on with the door open. Frank Salemi ended up eating this charge and did almost 20 years in prison for it. Either way, Barbossa testified and put men in prison for a crime they didn't commit. All this was known to the FBI, by the way. But he double-crossed the Mafia and his life was now void. He ended up becoming the first member of the new Witness Protection Program. During the trial, they even hid Barbossa on Thatcher Island off of Rockport. After the trial, he was located to California, and shortly after, he killed someone. Shocking. He only did a couple years for manslaughter thanks to the FBI. After his release in 1976, he was walking home in San Francisco when a van pulled up to him in broad daylight. The side door slid open and J.R. Russo popped out and blasted him with a shotgun. Barbossa, the biggest rat and Mafia's most hated, was dead. This made Russo a legend in Boston and the Mafia in general. Baione was heard on a recording calling Russo a fucking genius with a carbine! By the 1980s, the Boston machine was racking in millions of dollars a year with little opposition, but that's when things would start to go wrong. Raymond was being indicted for several cases. Whether it was the stress from the feds or the loss of his beloved wife Helen, Raymond suffered a heart attack and died in 1984. A little over a year later, Angiulo would be indicted for RICO and went to jail and would not come out for decades. Baione, who was also indicted, kept trying to stall court, saying for health reasons. He would even show up to court with an oxygen tank. After a while, the judge had had enough and sent Baione to prison. Chaos ensued in Boston shortly after. Raymond named his son Ray Jr. to be boss, but no one respected him. Everyone started battling for the throne, and the New England Mafia unraveled. The New England Mafia never recovered from this time period. It's basically non-existent at this point. Baione was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He wouldn't see the streets again. He died February 27, 1996 at a federal prison hospital in Springfield, Missouri. Whatever people want to say about Baione and Angiulo, they made the perfect brawn and brain combination, and they ruled the city with an iron fist for over 3 decades. Baione will go down as one of the fiercest enforcers in Boston history. If you like this video, please hit that like button, and comment, make requests, and please subscribe if you haven't. But most of all, take good care of yourself and have a great day.